Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. This week on the show, snapshots from a continent in the shadow of war. How are European capitals responding to the US-Iran conflict, and what is their exposure? Then, Spain, the outlier. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez defies the White House to double down on his opposition to US military actions in the Middle East. And as Russia's war with Ukraine continues, Croatia brings back compulsory conscription for the first time in 2 decades. It's been a heavy week. We're here to guide you through it. I'm going to be honest with you, this has been one of those weeks where I've actually found the news really quite hard to follow. At times, it even felt as though all the headlines in the world had morphed into one single unstoppable live ticker, each report more alarming than the next. And I suspect I may not be alone in this. So, to help us all understand and unpick the nuances of European responses to the US and Israel's coordinated strikes on Iran and all that has followed since, I've called upon the expertise of a selection of our correspondents across the continent. We begin, of course, with our security correspondent, Terry Schultz in Brussels.
On Thursday, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas convened an emergency meeting of foreign ministers, not just of EU countries, but also Gulf states. She says there are many common concerns that can be addressed with joint responses, beginning with the air attacks Iran has launched in retaliation.
We see actually the same drones that are attacking Kiev every day, now attacking also the Middle East. And there actually also Ukraine can help the Gulf countries because they have developed really, drone interceptors and drone protection. So we can see also how we can put these things together to help the countries to fight back the drone attacks.
Kallas also points out the shared problems of Iran blocking the all-important Strait of Hormuz, which is crucial for global shipping, as well as rising oil prices. Kallas is under pressure, as ever, to portray the 27 EU countries as unified, a task made more difficult when Spain refused to allow the U.S. the use of jointly operated military bases, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz declined to defend his Spanish counterpart. Kallas emphasizes there needs to remain what she called room for diplomacy to end the cycle of escalation.
J'ai donné ordre que le porte-avions Charles de Gaulle, ses moyens aériens.
I'm John Lawrenson in Paris, where President Macron has announced he's sending military reinforcements to the Mediterranean. In addition to the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier with its air capacity and frigate escort, the president revealed the deployment of Rafale fighter planes, anti-aircraft defense systems and airborne radar. These actions, Macron stressed, are strictly defensive in nature. France maintains small military bases in the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Iraq and Qatar. In his address, Macron reminded the French people that France has defence agreements with many of these countries and said French forces had downed drones in self-defence during the opening hours of the conflict. Macron said he was also sending additional air defence units to Cyprus following Iranian drone strikes on the British Royal Air Force RAF base there. This week, Macron also pledged French participation in a planned international force to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to oil and gas tanker traffic, and announced that France would be boosting its nuclear arsenal and extending deterrence to European allies. The next 50 years will be an era of nuclear weapons, he said.
I'm Lars Bavanger in the UK, where Prime Minister Keir Starmer has come under fire from both friends and foes, all accusing him of not taking a clear stance on the attacks on Iran. Earlier this week, Starmer told Parliament his government does not believe in regime change from the skies. But like many other European leaders, he stopped short of saying the attacks were in breach of international law. He said that the UK plays no part in this war, yet also accepted a US request to use UK air bases to bomb Iranian missile sites. And after an Iranian drone targeted a UK base on Cyprus, the only attack on an EU country so far, Starmer said he'd be sending a Royal Navy destroyer to protect the base. By not openly backing the attacks, the Prime Minister might also wreck his carefully curated relationship with President Trump, who dismissed Starmer this week as being no Winston Churchill.
I'm Dorian Jones in Istanbul, where on Wednesday NATO forces shot down an Iranian ballistic missile approaching Turkey. The missile, tracked by radar through Iraq and Syria, was intercepted by an American warship as it headed towards Turkey's Incirlik air base, which hosts a large American Air Force presence, including nuclear weapons. NATO member Turkey also hosts a NATO radar base close to the Iranian border, operated by American forces. Despite the US military presence, Turkey has traditionally maintained close ties with Tehran and had hoped not to be targeted by Iranian forces. But Tehran denies firing the missile. But some experts suggest the attack could also be an isolated decision of a local commander. Iran's armed forces have decentralized its command and control under the so-called Mosaic defense doctrine, developed in anticipation of exactly the kind of target attacks with which the US and Israel launched the conflict last week. Whatever the motivation, the missile incident adds to growing concerns in Ankara. It's been drawn into the conflict, and the Iranian ambassador to Ankara has been summoned to receive a formal complaint.
Our Istanbul correspondent Dorian Jones concluding that selection of European reactions to the US-Israeli war with Iran. Had Spain been included in that roundup, it would, not for the first time in recent years, have been in the role of principled opposition. So far, Spain is the only country to have outright condemned the US-Israeli offensive, and the left-wing government under Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has barred the US from using its military bases in Spain in the conflict. Spain's defiance on this and other issues has angered US President Donald Trump, who is now threatening Spain with economic sanctions. Here's how Jerry Haddon reported the story for our US partners at The World.
Prime Minister Sanchez was swift in condemning the Iran attacks and in sending out his foreign minister to double down on his stance. José Manuel Álvarez told reporters Monday that the U.S. will under no circumstances use its bases in our sovereign territory for actions that violate our existing treaties or international norms under the UN Charter. The United States has two military installations in Spain's south, an Air Force base in Morón and a naval facility in Brota along Spain's Atlantic coast. They're Cold War bases built back in the 1950s. They've long served as refueling and logistics points in support of conflicts elsewhere. Spain's ban on using them in the Iran war has not gone down well in Washington.
Spain has been terrible.
This was President Donald Trump warming up yesterday.
And now Spain actually said that we can't use their bases, and that's all right. We could use their base if we want. We could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it, but we don't have to.
The U.S. has moved at least 15 military aircraft from Spain since the weekend to other bases. As the aircraft took off, so did the bilateral tension.
I could tomorrow stop, or today, even better, stop everything having to do with Spain. All business having to do with Spain. I have the right to stop it. Embargoes, do anything I want with it. And we may do that with Spain. What do you think?
That question was directed at some of Trump's cabinet members who were with him in the Oval Office, among them Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who wholeheartedly agreed with the president. Spain's Pedro Sanchez had his own answer.
Hace 23 años, otra administración estadounidense nos arrastró a una guerra en Oriente Medio.
23 years ago, a different U.S. administration dragged us into a war in the Middle East, Sanchez said, referring to the war in Iraq under then-President George W. Bush. It was a war, Sanchez said, that in theory was to eliminate Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction and guarantee global security. The result, he said, was the opposite. That war was wildly unpopular among Spaniards, even before Spain joined the so-called Coalition of the Willing in defiance of the United Nations. There are no official polls yet on how Spaniards feel about the Iran war, but the vast majority disapprove of Donald Trump in general. Outside a Barcelona restaurant, Vicent Laporta and Rafa Torrent are sipping on a couple of midday vermouths. All wars are bad, says Torrent. They started this just to raise prices on gas, oil, everything. Sanchez is well aware of this sentiment, as he was when he condemned Israel's war in Gaza and the U.S. regime change in Venezuela in January. These stances have put Spain at odds with its U.S. ally, but the consequences may not be as dire as Trump has made them sound this week. Today, European Commission Vice President for Prosperity and Industrial Strategy, Sojourner, explained why as he came to Spain's defense.
Let
me be clear, he said, on trade matters, any threat against one member state is a threat to the entire European Union. It's an issue for the entire bloc to deal with. So Sanchez seems confident he can weather Trump's verbal assaults, besides domestic attacks from Spain's own conservative political parties, and then in elections next year, profit from Spain's widespread anti-Trump sentiment.
Jerry Haddon's report was first aired on The World, the perfect global complement to your Inside Europe listening.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're with The World, Public Radio's leading global news program.
We cover the biggest news events developing every day and give you the context you need to make sense of them.
And Carolyn, I also like our smaller stories, tales of discovery and human kindness, things that make us laugh.
Stories that kind of shrink our world and make us feel more connected.
Subscribe and listen every weekday to The World.
Whilst global attention has been focused on the Middle East this week, in Ukraine the fighting has of course continued, and so too have concerns that Russia's war could spill out and impact other European countries too. Croatia, at one geographical remove from Ukraine, with only Hungary in between, has become the latest European country to reintroduce military conscription in a bid to up its future defence capacity. Basic military training for 800 new recruits begins on Monday. 446 of those are volunteers, and 354 young men born in 2007 conscripted under the new compulsory service rules. Of all those called up, only 10 have declared a conscientious objection. Our Balkans correspondent, Guy Delaunay, reports.
In the days of Yugoslavia, conscription was a rite of passage. Young men had to commit to a year of military service. But the independent countries that emerged from Yugoslavia did away with the requirement. Now, Croatia is the first to bring back a form of conscription to give their young men some basic military grounding. They'll be trained in everything that we consider to be the basic military skills, says Croatian Defence Ministry official Ivan Jusic. But he says there's only so much a fresh recruit can learn in the 2 months of the modern military service. I won't say they'll be fully trained, he says, but they will be familiar with the Croatian army's modern systems, and everyone will certainly be trained in the basic infantry skills. Polls suggest that 7 out of 10 Croatians are in favour of mandatory military service, and when the required legislation went through the country's National Assembly last year, it passed with 84 votes in favour and just 11 against.
I don't see any challenges to this conscription.
Gordan Akrap is the vice-rector of Croatia's Franjo Tuđman Defence and Security University.
Some populist groups from far left, they said we don't need army, those investments we need to invest in kindergartens, etc. But the fact is that someone needs to protect the kindergartens and our way of European way of life and democracy, as you can see it. And this can be done in the last final stages by the army.
Here in Croatia's capital, Zagreb, people are all too aware of the war in Ukraine. A stray drone landed in the city centre soon after Russia's invasion, and only Hungary separates Croatia from the site of the fighting. So now the decision to scrap compulsory military service back in 2008 is looking like a relic of another, more peaceful time.
Situation in Europe, situation in Croatia, situation all around our neighbourhood was stable. Right now, it's a completely different situation.
Ivan Anušić is Croatia's defence minister.
4 years now we're looking the aggression Russian on the Ukraine, and not just Russian aggression in Ukraine, but proxy of the Russian all around Europe doing their job. And we have a serious conversation on the political level, and we said, okay, We must turn back this military conscription because, first of all, that situation is happening all around Europe and on our borders. And we don't have big problem with political decision.
Here in Croatia, it does seem that people are quite happy to do the 2 months military service.
Yes, we chose to the military service not be too long. That is the one reason. Second reason, it's mentality, our mentality. And the third reason, it's our experience from the 90s. This is very important when we talk about security of the Republic of Croatia, security our country, security our nation, and everything, because we remember what happening 30 years ago.
What the minister means by that is the war which led to Croatia's independence and which still forms a massive part of the country's identity. But it isn't the only place in the region considering the reintroduction of conscription. Neighbouring Slovenia is holding elections in a matter of weeks, and the party currently leading the polls is very much in favour of a return to compulsory military service.
The war is now more dangerous than at any time since the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Janez Janša is the leader of the right-wing Slovenian Democratic Party and a 3-time former prime minister. He says all European countries should bring back the draft.
So we must urgently and significantly enhance the defence capabilities of member states, reintroduce universal military conscription, and effectively pool research, development and production capacities of modern weaponry.
Croatia's other neighbour, Serbia, isn't a member of NATO or the EU, but it's also on the verge of reintroducing military service, and it's significantly increased military spending. The government has floated the idea of conscription on several occasions, and skeptics wonder if they will actually follow through. But President Aleksandar Vučić insists it's just a matter of time.
Razgovarali smo o vojnom roku, o tih 75 dana, ako se ne varam.
We talked about military service, about those 75 days. We'll be making decisions soon. The question is whether official service will start in December or March. But in any case, we will make that decision within the next month or two and present it to the National Assembly. Registration of conscripts will begin in September or October.
That sort of talk, along with the increased military spending, is making Kosovo and Bosnia nervous. In turn, Serbia is alarmed by Croatia's new military alliance with Kosovo and Albania. It's all adding up to increased tensions in the Western Balkans.
Any sort of military development you see in the Balkans actually just makes the whole region far, far less secure because everyone's reading it as being aimed against them.
Analyst James Kerr-Lindsay specialises in international conflict and the Balkans.
Serbia is not going to try and take Kosovo by force. It would mean going to conflict with NATO. That is the last thing that Serbia wants or can afford to have at the moment. The problem, of course, is that Croatia has been arming. And when Croatia buys arms, then Serbia looks at it and thinks we need to as well.
The wider implications are probably the last thing on the minds of the first recruits for Croatia's new version of military service. But the memories of conflict in this region are still fresh, and that could give basic training a little extra meaning. Guy Delorne, DW, Zagreb.
We move from those warlike sounds to the sounds of peace. The peace of a classical music concert experienced in your own living room. And no, I don't mean through speakers. People have been playing music for an audience at home for centuries. And in the Czech capital Prague, that tradition seems to be coming back. Rob Cameron reports.
There's no conductor, no score, and the audience of perhaps 36 people are drinking glasses of wine. In fact, there are no notes at all. It's an evening of improvisation for cello and flute. The cellist is Juraj Škoda, originally from Slovakia.
I'm here to explore how music and communication connects together. I have experiences also from Czech Philharmonic, or currently I play in Prague Cello Quartet.
So why, when you can play in some of the most prestigious venues in Prague, why come to someone's living room?
You know, Radka's and Luke's house is really special because it is filled with very well musically grounded people. And I think this is the ideal place for intimate improvisation.
Radka is Radka Smejkalova, a former journalist and now translator, and every few months she and her husband Luke open up the ground floor of their comfortable home in the southern suburbs of Prague to a different group of musicians.
The idea was to bring chamber music back to homes. And it was actually, the idea came from an excellent Czech cellist, a guy who works in Germany, but he lives actually nearby. And about 8 or 9 years ago, he came with that idea of bringing classical music back to people. And he also said that chamber music was actually made to be played in homes and not in great chamber halls, music halls. I attended actually one of his concerts that he organized in a local cafe, and then he said something like, well, you know, what you heard right now was chamber music, and, you know, if anybody feels like they would like to go with it, go with us, go with the flow, just let me know. And I just thought, oh, that's great. You know, I have the space, and I have a piano, and we love meeting people.
So you can study and practice, and you're not really improvising.
Uri and the flautist Jeremy Chapman stop every few minutes and discuss the improvisation with the audience, why they played something a certain way, who took the lead, whether they could replicate it. Jeremy says it's all part of the intimate dialogue between musician and listener.
I want people to see what musicians are thinking and feeling as they play. Instead of admiring something as being perfect, although not always perfect, but there's such an interesting inner landscape to the musician's perspective of their own playing. It's not always brilliant. You know, you work hard to make sure that everything is very, very good. But there's such an interesting story to be told about the processes from the musician's perspective.
That was echoed by the audience members I spoke to. This woman said it was precisely that perspective, that story that she got from such evenings, which she now attends regularly. The man who inspired Radka and Luke to open up their home is the Czech cellist Tomáš Jamník, who instigated the whole home concerts revival in the Czech Republic. Aimed at breaking down the resistance of young audiences to classical music by making it more accessible, it appears to be a success. There's even a website where you can sign up to host, perform, or just listen. For DW, this is Rob Cameron in Prague.
The peace of my own living room beckons now as I prepare to hand over to Inside Europe's Laura Kabelka, who has a half-hour special prepared for you ahead of International Women's Day on Sunday. If you're tuning in via a partner station that leaves us at this point, never fear. The whole show will be available on all the usual podcast platforms. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany.
Welcome back to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio program from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Laura Kabelka in Berlin. March 8 is coming up, and that means all around the world, people will be marching for International Women's Day again. It's a day to celebrate women's achievements, but also to fight for more. Because women and girls still face barriers to bodily autonomy, political and professional representation, equal pay, access to healthcare and education, protection from domestic and sexual violence and online hate, affordable childcare, you name it. That's why in this next half hour, we'll focus on European stories that reflect on some key milestones in women's struggles, both past and present.
Today in the college, we adopted the Commission's reply to the European Citizens' Initiative, My Voice, My Choice. We have analyzed the initiative and concluded that, yes, it is possible to use EU funds to support member states' efforts for better access to safe and legal abortion care, and therefore to reduce the number of unsafe abortions.
This was Roxana Mienzatu, Vice President of the European Commission, a few days ago. The European Citizens' Initiative, My Voice, My Choice, had called for a new financial solidarity mechanism so that women in countries with restrictive laws can access safe abortions elsewhere in the EU. The initiative gathered over 1 million signatures from all 27 member states. This means they exceeded the requirements needed for such a citizens' initiative to oblige the Commission to at least respond. And last week, this much-anticipated reply came in. Instead of a new fund, however, the Commission said that member states could voluntarily use the already existing European Social Fund to support those seeking an abortion abroad. So while many were quick to call this a historic moment for abortion rights, my first question to the initiative's coordinator, Nika Kovac, was, does she see this as a win?
For us, the big victory is that they said yes, and that they said for the first time in the history of the European Union, yes, abortion can be funded with the European Union funds. This is a big, big, big success. They found a way how to do this immediately. If they would be creating a new financial mechanism, this would be additional years of negotiations. For us, what is the most important is that at the end of the day, women from the places where they cannot get abortion will have the option to get it. What is our disappointment is that in the direct answer, they didn't promise like any allocated additional funds for this. But what is giving us hope is that we have a strong majority in the European Parliament and we can push for that change through the European Parliament.
Do you know how much money would be left for this in the European Social Fund?
No, so basically, like we do not have yet the calculations, but what we know is that for all those expenses connected with like abortions, and they also did a step further, they basically said we will also finance accommodation and travel. It would be a couple of millions, which in terms of the funds of the European Union, which are like billions, is not a lot.
So you know it will be millions?
Yes.
But how much money in your calculation would be needed to enable it?
So it would be like between 4 and 7 million per year.
Okay, so it could be around that.
Yeah.
How many abortions would that be?
We don't know exact number, like because there is no statistics on unsafe abortions right now. We just know from which countries this would happen, but also we think that it would not be a big number of people. But it's important because there are still cases like just right now in Poland, there was a woman in a hospital who was in critical condition because they didn't provide abortion to her. So that kind of cases should not happen, and that kind of funds could help.
Right. So this European Social Fund, it's running until 2027. Do you know what would happen after? Like, would you have to restart this whole process?
This is why our campaign cannot die, because we will need to make sure that even after this period of time, there will be still funds to fund this. And we promised ourselves to do two things in the next couple of months. Firstly, to get the countries on board. And secondly, also to make sure that we will develop a way that these funds will be secured for the next couple of years.
This all is, of course, happening at a time where right-wing parties are gaining ground across Europe. The European Parliament has shifted to the right in the last elections. You said a few days ago that you were told the Commission was going to respond negatively. So why the change of heart, you think?
I think because of so many people. You cannot imagine like how the campaign looked in last week. Like we got 250,000 of signatures of people who said like we don't agree with the answer that European Commission is giving out now. We collected with small donations more than 45,000 euros for campaign across Brussels. We put faces of the Commissioner Labib and Ursula von der Leyen in different media, and also we got the support from 11 governments. We got the support from more than 180 non-governmental organizations. We got the support from ex-prime ministers and celebrities. Like it was impossible to unsee the campaign. And also, I think that it was a test for European democracy. My Voice, My Choice went through the democratic procedure. We are not a group of like crazy people who would just scream something. We are crazy in our own way, but we followed the procedures. We followed the system that European Commission established. We followed the procedure to get the support from the parliament. Then we followed the procedure to get the support of governments. And then if the commission would just say no, it would mean that all these steps does not mean anything.
Okay, let's take a step back. How did My Voice, My Choice come to be?
Yeah, so My Voice, My Choice was born in US, basically. I was there studying for a year, and I was there when a constitutional court took the decision to take away reproductive rights from women in the US. And for me, this was like really shocking because I'm coming from Slovenia, a country where we have abortion written in the constitution, and I couldn't believe that like rights can be just taken away. So I became obsessed with the idea how to make sure that Europe will not become US and how to protect reproductive rights in Europe. 2 years ago, like before this, we needed a lot of time to basically figure out in what way to write a legal proposal. I never knew that in Europe you cannot just like legalize abortion everywhere because European Union cannot change the national laws. So we needed to find a solution which would allow women to travel to places where abortion is safe and accessible without interference in their own national states.
Were there challenges you faced or roadblocks?
Tons of them. Firstly, it's extremely hard to collect the signatures because citizens need to put like the ID number in the system. And also there was nothing like unified civil society. Like, for example, in Germany, we worked with a lot of different groups, a lot of volunteers, and final signatures, till the million signatures come from Germany. Luisa Neubauer, who is my very good friend, she called me just a couple of days before Christmas. She said, you need 30,000 signatures to come to 1 million. I will help you get it. And basically German women organized and got the final 30,000 signatures. After this, it was super hard to come to Brussels. We didn't have a clue how European institutions function, like who are our allies. So everyone were saying to us, it's impossible, stop fighting. Like you cannot convince members of parliament to support you. But at the end, we did it. And we won with a big majority in the parliament. Commission was a journey on its own, much more closed institution. There was like barrier after barrier. We were also shadow banned. We were attacked on the street. But at the end, what we learned with this campaign is that in all the countries in European Union minus Malta, more than 75% of people is supportive about reproductive rights and that there is more of us.
The reactions to the Commission's response, of course, were mixed. Critics in countries like Poland or Malta, where abortion laws are highly restrictive, say that member states should retain control over health policy, that EU action undermines national legal choices. What do you say to that?
You cannot ban a citizen of Europe who is seeking help in another country with abortion. This is legally proven because Ireland wanted stopped women going to have abortion in other places when it was forbidden there. So that kind of stuff they cannot do. It is totally legally possible. This is what European Commission said now a couple of times. It is a clear case and they cannot do anything about it. And this is why this is such a big victory. And what is the most important is that maybe this opens a chance that not a single woman in European Union will be without a doctor when she would need it.
Very interesting what you're saying, because in the US, we see a completely different direction being taken, right? There are states that are trying to criminalize attempts of people going to other states where they can get an abortion. So you're not worried that similar measures would take place in Poland, for example?
It's not legally possible. It was already a decision which was taken. And right now with our campaign, I think we also just proved once again that this situation cannot happen in Europe. And we really, really need to protect this.
So what's next for you?
So for us, what is important right now is firstly to take some rest, because it was a 3-year-old marathon through the institutions. And then we want to fight for national states to say yes to safe and accessible abortion in their own countries and to opt into this mechanism, and to make sure that the European Parliament will make sure that there will be money for safe and accessible abortion also in next phases of this project. And then who knows what will happen next. But at the beginning, we thought that My Voice, My Choice will be just a campaign and then we will just disappear. Now it became a movement. I think Europe needs to have a connected feminist civil society, and we are here to stay. So people in the institution can expect some good troubles with us.
Nika Kovac, coordinator of My Voice, My Choice. It's important to acknowledge that abortion is an area of genuine moral disagreement in many societies, with deeply held views on all sides, particularly around questions of the point at which life begins and how to weigh competing interests. That being said, lack of access to safe, timely, affordable, and respectful abortion care is a critical public health and human rights issue. That's according to the World Health Organization, which includes comprehensive abortion care in its list of essential healthcare services published in 2020. Lack of access to such care can force women to turn to unsafe abortions, which are one of 5 leading causes of maternal mortality worldwide, and the only one that is preventable, according to Doctors Without Borders. In most European countries, abortion is generally permitted within a term limit below fetal viability, usually set between 12 to 14 weeks. This has not always been the case, and legal changes didn't come without a fight. It took extraordinary bravery and acts of civil disobedience. France is a powerful example. Early-stage abortion was decriminalized there more than half a century ago. Late last year, French lawmakers approved a bill exonerating women who had been punished for undergoing illegal abortions before that reform. Feminists hailed the move as another victory for the world's first country to explicitly enshrine abortion rights in its constitution in 2024. But some warn against complacency, pointing to parts of Europe and beyond where abortion access is being restricted or rolled back altogether. Lisa Bryant reports from Paris.
Bienvenue dans le podcast Merci Simone. Ici, nous entendrons les histoires de femmes.
From her home in southern France, Lucie Barrault posts a regular podcast called Merci Simone, or Thank You Simone, on social media. It features conversations with women from across the country. They have one thing in common. They all had abortions. Some are teenagers. Then there's 80-year-old Michelle, who had an abortion before it was legal by a man who used 2 knitting needles.
En France, on est une femme sur 3 à avorter.
In France, 1 in 3 women has an abortion, but many lack information and they don't know where to find it.
Barrault launched her podcast last June after she too had an abortion.
Je me suis sentie bien seule, pourtant j'avais...
I felt very alone. I was 28 or 29. In my hospital room, there was an 18-year-old woman, and we spoke, and I thought it would be cool to have a podcast where women share their abortion experiences with other women.
Et que les femmes racontent leur histoire.
The podcast title, Merci Simone, pays tribute to several Simones. One is author and philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. She was one of 343 women who in 1971 publicly declared they had had what was then an illegal abortion. Risking persecution, they pushed for change.
Aucune femme ne recourt de gaieté de cœur à l'avortement. Il suffit d'écouter les femmes. C'est toujours un drame.
A few years later, in 1975, abortion was decriminalized. This was spearheaded by another Simone, Holocaust survivor and former health minister, Simone Weil. But in the decades before this crucial change in legislation, estimates indicate that thousands of women were convicted for abortion-related offenses.
Pour moi, c'est jamais trop tard. C'est bien que ça arrive aujourd'hui.
For me, it's never too late to have a law rehabilitating these women who were condemned because they aborted. It shows the government recognizes it wasn't just. But unfortunately, many of these women are no longer alive.
De ces femmes-là qui ne le verront pas.
Today, many European Union countries allow abortions, although only 5, including France, have fully decriminalized the procedure. Poland and Malta continue to have near-total abortion bans. Far-right parties, many opposing abortion access, are surging in Europe. Across the Atlantic in the United States, legalized abortion is being rolled back after the Supreme Court overturned a constitutional right to the procedure.
C'est la première grande manifestation féministe qui se tient à Paris.
78-year-old Annie Shemla still remembers the days when women like herself fought to make abortion legal in France. 2 years ago, she published a book about it.
The motivation for my book was to warn young women to be careful. They may believe because the law exists for 50 years, it's a given, but it's a fragile law and we must remain mobilized. C'est un droit fragile et il faut rester mobilisé.
Leading anti-abortion activist Caroline Roux thinks the opposite is happening.
La politique des États-Unis conduit à un durcissement dans notre pays.
The U.S. policy is leading to a hardening in France. Out of fear of losing access to abortion, France is instead increasing it. What's problematic, and I see this in the U.S. as well, is we're in a for it or against it debate, without looking at the causes of abortion or ways to prevent them.
Mais quelles sont les causes? Comment on pourrait éviter l'avortement à certaines?
Roux points to an IFOP poll supported by her group, Alliance Vita, that shows that while most French accept abortions, 9 in 10 believe they leave psychological scars.
We're calling for prevention. There are a lot of abortions that could be avoided if we address the causes.
Et surtout les jeunes filles. Alors, peut-être que tu peux être la personne la plus douce envers toi-même.
Podcaster Lucie Barrault sees things differently. Even today, she argues, women wanting to abort face a raft of barriers, and talking about the procedure remains largely taboo. Merci Simone aims to change that. Lisa Bryant, DW, Paris.
Merci Simone. You're listening to Inside Europe. I'm Laura Kabelka in Berlin. In the EU, about 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Across studies, women are several times more likely to experience sexual violence than men, and most sexual violence against both women and men is perpetrated by men. It's important to note that male victimization exists and may be underreported. And while sexual violence can have lifelong consequences for survivors, such acts often go unpunished. Roughly 10% of rape cases get reported, and only around 5% of those lead to a conviction. In Italy, up until 1981, a fascist-era law even allowed a man accused of rape to avoid criminal punishment if he just married the victim. This was called a rehabilitating marriage, and the rehabilitation was seen as working both ways, since through the act of rape, the woman was seen as having lost her so-called honor. That all changed, however, thanks to the courage of one woman. Her name is Franca Viola. Our reporter, Danny Mitzman, reflects on her legacy.
Io non sono proprietà di nessuno. I am nobody's property. Nobody can force me to love a person I don't respect. Honor is lost by the person who does certain things, not the one who endures them. Non chi le subisce.
The words of Franca Viola, voiced by 17-year-old Maya, the same age today as Franca Viola when she was kidnapped and raped by the man who wanted to marry her despite her refusal. He was from a wealthy Sicilian family with mafia connections. She was the daughter of a humble farmer. But despite intimidation and threats to her family, Franca rejected the tradition of matrimonio riparatore, rehabilitating marriage, at the time still customary and sanctioned by Italian law. Instead, she took her attacker to court and saw him receive a landmark 11-year sentence. On top of that, Franca Viola, a so-called dishonoured woman in 1960s Sicily, went on to marry the local boy who'd been courting her. The newlyweds received congratulations from the President and the Prime Minister and a private audience with the Pope. Franca Viola's courageous stance made her a symbol of women's emancipation in Italy. Yet, despite this happening in 1965, it took until 1981 for the marry or rapist law, together with honour killing, to be removed from Italy's penal code.
For laws of this kind that reflect deep patriarchal structures, you need society to be ready for them to change.
That's Professor Susanna Mancini, the chair of Comparative Constitutional Law at the University of Bologna. While Italy's post-war constitution promoted values of equality, a man tells national television cameras that Sicilians don't want the law to change because they have a different character from people in the north.
Some of these patterns were very ingrained in parts of Italian society. Even if you look at how courts reacted whenever they were confronted with similar discrepancies, right, between fascist, patriarchal, misogynist laws and the Constitution. It took them forever before they finally decided that it was time to change.
Change did eventually come, propelled by one group's determination to challenge the Mussolini-era framework of Italian law.
I think that the feminist movement was absolutely fundamental in prompting the institutions in Italy to rethink about gender equality. So that definitely made a big difference, right? In 1975, family law was changed, and this made women and men equal in marriage. So all these fascist patriarchal norms were even more obviously unconstitutional.
At the time, sex education was unheard of, and machismo the accepted norm in the majority Catholic country. Cora Benetti, a feminist researcher and historian at Bologna University, describes how Italian feminists effected change.
I think it was thanks to the ability of the movement to reach different part of the country, of the population, because they were like students or people that were in the university or lawyers and teachers. They were going to poor neighborhoods to speak to the women, to open some consultoria.
Drop-in centers.
Yes, and doing like sexual education in the squares, and it was big because it was everywhere. It was in the theater, in the street, in the school, in all the places where women were working.
Non si sia aperti I pantaloni, mi mettono la giacca.
There is this like famous feminist, Franca Rame, that is she was an actress and also a politician in the 70s, and she did like this super famous monologue about a rape, and then at the end of it she told everyone that it was her story.
La giacca sui seni
It wasn't until 1996 that the legal definition of sexual violence was changed from being a crime against public morality to a crime against the person. This century, rising statistics regarding violence against women came to a head in 2023 with the horrific case of Giulia Cecchettin, a young university student brutally murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Nationwide protests led to a unanimous parliamentary vote making the crime of femicide a distinct law, thereby recognising gender-based motives behind such killings.
Of course, it's good news. However, it is part and parcel of a way to tackle violence against women, which is very typical of right-wing governments, which, contrary to what the Istanbul Convention, which is the Council of Europe Convention to combat violence against women and domestic violence, which has a holistic approach and would like member states to tackle both the prevention and protection of women as well as the prosecution. Well, right-wing governments tend to focus on prosecution. They tend to use criminal law and criminal procedure as the number one instrument to combat violence against women. But I am not very happy with that approach because, of course, it's an approach that somehow makes the electorate of such parties happy, like it's a punitive approach, but it doesn't really tackle the fundamental problems. So prevention and protection.
It was just an easy way for Giorgia Meloni to say, I did something, but she's not really doing something about sexual education or improving way for a woman to report when they are in danger because of an ex-partner or a partner. She's closing the violence centers. She's not helping the associations that trying to do something for women in a situation of violence.
Both Cora Benetti and Susanna Mancini say Prime Minister Meloni's government is taking Italy further and further from the values of the Istanbul Convention. A yes means yes style bill was passed last year, which defined rape as a sexual act without consent. But this year the wording was amended, essentially replacing consent with dissent, and explicitly stated no. From being frozen with fear to not being fully conscious, there are many scenarios which make this change worrying.
It makes me feel bad because I would like to be proud of my country, and I am just seeing progress occurring in many other countries. The Czech Republic actually recently changed its rape law after a very intense national debate, and now they have exactly what we don't. And this is happening in many other countries.
Right now, like all the changes also that they are doing in school, everything is going to more tradition, less speaking about sex, less speaking about gender. We don't have the best government right now, so I don't think they will protect us from these changes that are happening around the world.
Professor Mancini thinks we're currently seeing a remasculinization of politics.
There is a lot of anti-gender equality pressure, and we have to be extremely careful because very unfortunately feminist gains are, we have to still fight for them. They're not forever, and it's extremely dangerous what is going on, not just in Italy, but in many other countries with populist and illiberal forces.
Danny Mitzman for DW in Bologna.
And that's it for today. This program was produced by Kate Laycock and me, Laura Kabelka. Our sound engineers were Moritz Vogt and Gerd Georgi. If you want to make us happy, you can leave us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn and Berlin.